The jungle was alive. The air was thick with moisture, and the scent of damp earth clung to every breath. Towering trees, their canopies intertwined like an endless ceiling, loomed overhead, casting long shadows that danced with the shifting light. Kara crouched low in the undergrowth, her sleek, feline-like frame blending seamlessly into the foliage. She had been tracking the human for a week now, watching his every move. This was supposed to be an easy hunt. Humans were prey, slow, weak, predictable. At least, that's what the stories said. She licked her sharp canines and adjusted the grip on her energy spear. The human had been moving erratically, never settling, never resting long enough for her to strike. He was a soldier, one of the elite Terran scouts that had gained a reputation across the galaxy. That was why this kill would be special. It would prove she was the apex predator, the superior hunter. The thrill sent shivers down her spine. Through the dense foliage, she spotted him again. He was crouched near a small stream, filling a metal canteen, his muscles taut under his torn uniform. His dark eyes flicked across the jungle, sensing something. Kara held her breath. The jungle had a rhythm, a pulse. One wrong move and he'd hear it. She had been careful, but so had he. The first day, she followed at a distance, watching. By the third day, she began setting traps. Every single one had failed. The sixth day, she had nearly had him, a carefully laid snare, concealed with expert precision, but he had stopped just before stepping into it. He had laughed. Not a nervous chuckle. A knowing, mocking laugh that sent an unnatural chill through her. Now, she was certain, he knew he was being hunted. Kara tensed as the human stood, his gaze lingering on the trees, the underbrush, the branches swaying above. He wasn't scared. He was waiting. A sharp snap behind her. Her blood froze. She turned, but too late. A rope tightened around her ankle, yanking her upward in an instant. Her spear flew from her grip, clattering against the jungle floor. She dangled, upside down, eyes wide, heart pounding. From the shadows, the human emerged. He moved with an unnatural calmness, rolling his shoulders, tilting his head as he studied her. "Been following me for a while, haven't you?" His voice was smooth, almost amused. Kara snarled, twisting, reaching for her belt knife, but a sharp whistle sliced through the air. Pain shot through her wrist as a knife embedded itself into the tree beside her hand, pinning her in place. Her eyes darted to his face. He was grinning. She bared her teeth. "You are prey. I am the hunter." He chuckled, stepping closer. "You sure about that?" He tapped her hanging form with the butt of his rifle. "Because it kinda looks the other way around." Fury burned in her veins, but she forced herself to remain still. He was testing her. Playing with his food. She had underestimated him. Fine. Mistakes could be corrected. The human reached up and, in a swift motion, sliced through the rope. Kara twisted midair, landing on all fours, teeth bared, claws extended. She lunged. But he was already gone. A sharp impact struck her ribs, sending her sprawling. She gasped, rolling, scrambling to her feet, but the human had already melted into the trees. The jungle swallowed him whole, like he had never been there. For the first time in her life, Kara felt it, the chill of being prey. Her chest heaved as she scanned the jungle, ears twitching at every sound. He was out there. Watching. Waiting. Her hunt had just begun. And she was no longer sure she was the one doing the hunting. The night thickened around Kara, the jungle pressing against her senses like a living thing. The silence was a deception, she knew that now. The human was out there, somewhere in the void between shadows, turning the hunt against her. It was an insult, one that burned through her like fire. Her breathing was steady, but her pulse throbbed in her throat. She had never been the hunted before. Never known the sensation of being watched by unseen eyes, of uncertainty clawing at her resolve. It was intoxicating in its own twisted way. And infuriating. She moved, slow and deliberate, weaving through the undergrowth, her ears straining for any disturbance, her tail flicking in agitation. Every step felt wrong. The jungle, once an extension of her instincts, was now foreign terrain. He had turned it into his domain. A rustle. Not natural. Too deliberate. Kara's muscles coiled, and she spun, her claws unsheathed, ready to lash out. But nothing. Just trees and the layered hum of nocturnal creatures. Yet she knew he was close. She crouched lower, shifting her weight with practiced silence. If he thought she would panic, he was mistaken. He was cunning, she'd give him that. But she was still the superior predator. She would prove it. A low, sharp whistle cut through the darkness. Kara froze. Her eyes narrowed. It was a taunt. A game. He was drawing her out, testing her reactions. Her claws curled into the damp soil. Fine. She would play. She lunged toward the direction of the sound, her movements blurring as she leaped through the trees, bounding from branch to branch, her eyes scanning, searching. Nothing. Another sound, behind her this time. A scrape of metal against bark. She twisted midair, landing in a crouch. Her ears flicked, her nostrils flaring. He was circling her. Her tail lashed in frustration. He was keeping his distance, staying just beyond her reach. That meant he wasn't certain he could win in a direct fight. Good. She let out a slow exhale, forcing herself to think. He had planned this. He had been waiting for her to make a mistake. But she wouldn't. Not again. Then, something small landed near her foot. A metallic cylinder, barely the length of her palm. Her eyes widened. A sudden hiss erupted from it, and thick, choking smoke exploded outward, swallowing the air in a suffocating cloud. She staggered back, coughing, her vision obscured. Her ears rang with the sudden burst of sound, a secondary device detonating nearby, disorienting her further. She felt it before she saw it, the shift in the air, the movement behind her. She spun, lashing out, but her claws met nothing but empty space. A rough grip seized the back of her neck, a force she had not anticipated sending her crashing into the ground. Her limbs flailed as she twisted, snarling, but the weight pressing her down was relentless. Her vision cleared just enough to see him, his dark eyes gleaming in the night, his expression unreadable. "Got you," he murmured. Kara let out a feral growl, muscles tensing beneath him. This was far from over. Kara's muscles coiled beneath his grip, every instinct screaming at her to fight. She was a predator. She would not be subdued so easily. With a sudden, savage twist, she forced her weight to one side, using the human's momentum against him. The grip on her neck loosened just enough for her to roll free, springing back onto all fours. Her breath came fast, chest rising and falling as she glared at him. He was watching her, his expression calm, unreadable. The jungle seemed to hold its breath around them, the distant cries of the night creatures fading into nothing. She bared her fangs. "You fight like prey." A slow smile tugged at the corners of his lips. "And yet, here we are." He moved first this time. A blur of muscle and precision, his stance shifting as he lunged. But Kara was ready. She feinted left, then struck with her claws, aiming for his exposed ribs. The moment her strike connected, she realized her mistake. His body twisted at the last second, absorbing the blow just enough to lessen its impact. And then, before she could pull away, his hands were on her again. One gripping her wrist, the other pressing against her throat. She lashed out, raking her claws across his arm. He grunted, but didn't let go. Instead, he used her own force against her, spinning her, slamming her back against a tree. The impact stole her breath. For a brief, tense moment, neither of them moved. His grip remained firm but not crushing. Their eyes locked, and she could feel the rapid thrum of his pulse beneath his skin. He was strong, stronger than she had anticipated. But there was something else, something she hadn't expected. Respect. She could see it in his gaze, in the way he hadn't drawn his blade to end this. He wasn't just fighting to survive. He was testing her, measuring her strength against his own. Kara swallowed back a growl, breathing through the heat of her frustration. "You think this is a game?" The human tilted his head slightly. "No. I think it's a lesson." She narrowed her eyes, her tail flicking in irritation. "And what exactly am I supposed to learn?" He finally released her, stepping back, rolling his shoulder where her claws had sliced through his skin. His lips curved again, that same infuriating smirk. That maybe you're not the only predator in this jungle. Her ears twitched. He was toying with her, but there was no arrogance in his tone, just quiet confidence. It unsettled her more than she cared to admit. She inhaled deeply, steadying herself. This wasn't over. Not yet. A rustling from the trees above made them both tense. Kara's head snapped up, her instincts flaring. Something was moving. Something big. The human's expression shifted instantly, his body lowering into a defensive stance. She mirrored him, all thoughts of their battle forgotten. The jungle had been theirs alone for days. But now, something else had joined the hunt. The jungle pulsed with danger, an unseen force pressing against them. Kara's instincts screamed at her, the thick scent of something foreign lingering in the air. The human beside her was still, his breathing measured, his body coiled and ready. In that moment, they were no longer adversaries. They were two predators facing a greater unknown. The first shadow moved, slithering between the trees, too fast for her eyes to follow. A guttural clicking sound reverberated through the jungle, sending a primal shiver down her spine. This was no ordinary beast. The human spoke in a whisper, barely audible. Not alone. Kara tightened her grip on her blade. Her pride wanted to tell him she didn't need his warning, but she knew better. Whatever lurked beyond the veil of darkness was unlike anything she had faced before. The attack came swiftly. A monstrous shape burst from the underbrush, sleek, multi-limbed, and glistening in the moonlight. Its eyes burned with hunger, and its mandibles snapped in eager anticipation. Kara moved on instinct, slashing at the creature's flank as the human fired his weapon, the sharp crack of gunfire echoing through the jungle. But the beast was fast. It dodged her strike, twisting its grotesque body unnaturally as it lunged toward the human. He barely managed to roll aside before its razor-sharp appendages slashed through the space he had occupied a heartbeat before. Kara didn't hesitate. She leaped, claws extended, aiming for the creature's exposed back. She drove her blade deep, earning a piercing screech. The human took advantage of the opening, placing a precise shot into its skull. Silence fell. The beast twitched once, then collapsed. Kara stood over it, breathing heavily. The human exhaled and holstered his weapon. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. Then, she turned to him, studying the way he held himself. There was no gloating, no arrogance. Only quiet understanding. "You could have let me die," she said at last, testing the weight of the words. He met her gaze, unflinching. "So could you." Kara tilted her head. He was right. At any moment during their fight, she could have let him fall, taken the easy path to victory. But she hadn't. And neither had he. A slow realization settled over her. The hunt had never been about domination, about proving superiority. True strength wasn't about standing alone, it was about knowing when to fight and when to trust. She sheathed her weapon. "This jungle has taught me much." The human smirked, wiping blood from his arm. "Same here." They stood in silence for a moment longer before Kara turned and walked away, her tail flicking once in farewell. She had come seeking prey. Instead, she had found something far more valuable. Respect. The jungle would always belong to the strongest. But strength, she realized, was not merely measured in the hunt. It was in knowing when to walk away, when to fight, and when to recognize an equal. And with that, she disappeared into the shadows, her lesson learned, her hunt truly over.